All right, so let's talk about a chapter in the Bible that, if we're being honest, most of us just kind of skip right over. Genesis chapter 5. You know the one, the genealogy. It looks like a really dry, really long list of names. But what if I told you that it's actually hiding one of the most dramatic and powerful messages in the entire Bible? Well, today, we're going to uncover it.
We're going to break this down into 3 parts. First, we're going to see why this seemingly boring list is actually a terrifying verdict. Then, right in the middle of all that darkness, we're going to find this incredible exception to the rule, a man named Enoch. And finally, we'll solve a biblical mystery that involves 2 guys with the exact same name but shockingly different destinies.
So first up, let's talk about this relentless drumbeat of death. You might think you're reading an ancient family tree, but trust me, it's something much, much darker.
Come on, you know the feeling, right? We've all been there. You get to a chapter like this, you see that wall of begats, and your mind just checks out. It feels ancient, totally irrelevant, and, well, kind of boring.
But that's where we miss the point. See, Genesis 5 isn't some celebration of people living really long lives. It's a solemn record. It's an accounting of a death sentence being carried out one generation after another. This is basically the historical receipt for the fall of humanity.
So this is the record for Adam himself. I mean, 930 years sounds pretty impressive, right? But the sentence ends with those 4 inescapable words, "and he died." And that phrase, it becomes this haunting refrain.
For Adam, then for Seth, for Enosh, for Canaan, it just goes on, 8 times. It's like a funeral drum, just beating over and over. This isn't just a little biographical detail. It's a theological verdict. This is the consequence of a broken covenant with God. It's the fulfillment of that warning, "In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die."
Now check out the subtle but absolutely devastating shift in the language here. The chapter starts by reminding us that yes, God made humanity in His perfect image. But then, just 2 verses later, we see that Adam has a son, Seth. And Seth isn't born in God's image. He's born in Adam's own fallen likeness. And this is the biblical doctrine of original sin, right here in action. The corruption, the brokenness, that death sentence, it's all passed down, genetically, spiritually. This genealogy is the first historical record of that tragic inheritance. Every single name on this list, despite their long lives, is born under the sentence of death.
But just when the darkness seems completely overwhelming, a brilliant flash of light breaks through. And it's the story of a man named Enoch.
Seriously, among all these tombstones in this chapter, one man's biography is totally radically different. It shatters the pattern, it defies the verdict, and it points to a completely different possibility for all of us.
Just look at that ending. It doesn't say, "and he died." It says, "he was no more because God took him." Whoa. Enoch actually escapes death. He's the great exception. So the huge question is, why? Well, the text tells us it's because he walked faithfully with God.
You know, we often picture someone who walks with God as this quiet, gentle mystic, totally removed from the world. But you have to remember the violent, crazy era Enoch lived in. The rest of the Bible reveals his walk with God was anything but peaceful. In fact, the answer's kind of shocking.
This quote absolutely nails his true character. The book of Jude shows us Enoch wasn't some quiet guy in a cave. He was a fiery, confrontational prophet. He stood right in the middle of a wicked generation and proclaimed God's coming judgment. He wasn't hiding from the world at all. He was putting it on notice.
So for Enoch, walking with God meant living with this urgent end times perspective. He truly believed in that promised deliverer from Genesis 3:15, the one who would crush the serpent's head, and he warned the world that this Lord was coming to judge. His faith wasn't passive. It was a bold, prophetic stance against a fallen world.
Okay, this brings us to our final and maybe the most stunning discovery hidden in these genealogies. It's a tale of 2 men named Lamech, and they represent 2 completely different paths for humanity.
Now, it is no accident that the same name, Lamech, shows up in both the ungodly line of Cain, back in chapter 4, and then again in the godly line of Seth, here in chapter 5. The Bible is doing this on purpose. It's setting up a powerful, deliberate contrast.
So on one side, you've got the Lamech who came from Cain. He represents the city of man, and he's all about arrogance, violence, and self-reliance. But on the other side, you've got the Lamech from Seth's line, who represents the people of God.
He is defined by humility, sorrow over this fallen world, and a deep longing for God's promised rescue.
This is the boast of Cain's Lamech. It's insane. He kills a young man just for injuring him, and then he writes a poem about it, which is called The Song of the Sword. He basically scoffs at God's protection of Cain and declares his own vengeance will be 11 times greater. He trusts completely in his own strength and his own violence.
Now, just listen to the difference with Seth's Lamech. He doesn't boast, he laments. He feels the heaviness of God's curse on the ground, the painful toil of life in a fallen world. And instead of trusting his own sword, he looks to God for comfort. He even names his son Noah, which means rest.
I mean, the contrast could not be clearer. One Lamech tries to build his own salvation through violence. The other one recognizes he's helpless, he grieves the brokenness of the world, and he puts his hope in God's promised salvation, a future rest.
And here, this is where it gets truly incredible. It's like God embeds this hidden numerical message right into their stories. Cain's Lamech boasted of 77-fold revenge, the ultimate number of human rebellion. But how long did Seth's Lamech live? Exactly 777 years.
This is so cool. The contrast in these numbers is deeply symbolic. See, 7 is the biblical number of perfection. So 77 kind of represents the perfection of human sin. But 777, that represents the perfection of divine rest and salvation. It's like God wrote the answer to this man's prayer into his very lifespan. He sought rest from the curse, and God gave him a life that was a literal sign of perfect divine rest.
And there's one more layer of mercy here that's just beautiful. Lamech died at age 777, which was just 5 years before the Great Flood wiped out the world. God, in his incredible kindness, took this righteous man home to his final rest, sparing him from having to see the terrifying judgment that was about to fall.
So this boring list of names, it's actually looking right at us today and asking a very pointed question. In our own lives, when we get hurt, when we feel the weight of this cursed world, which path do we choose? Do we pick up the sword of Cain's Lamech, trusting in our own strength, our own anger, our own 77-fold revenge? Or do we follow the path of Seth's Lamech, lamenting the brokenness and looking for the true 777-fold rest that can only be found in the one his son Noah prefigured, Jesus Christ? That's the choice Genesis 5 lays before all of us.